The Honourable Member for Abitibi-Temiscamingue. Well, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to talk about housing today because it is a critical issue in my riding, which is very rural in nature. And this is an issue that has been problematic for several years now. In several locations, there is no social housing. Nothing has been built since the end of the 80s. Nothing has changed or moved. And for the most part, what we're seeing are units for aging couples or people. And so in most small villages, all there is in terms of affordable housing are residences for older people. So nothing for families. There are a few projects that have been in place in some of the cities, in the municipalities. And when I spoke to the mayors in these cities, they've all told me just how complicated it is to put these projects together with all of the requirements. And sometimes it's so discouraging that they just want to give up because there's no end to the bureaucracy. Oftentimes, administrative requirements for putting forth social housing projects for rural communities are exactly regardless of the size of the project. So what you're required to fill out in terms of paperwork and requirements is exactly the same as if you were building a 200-unit building in downtown Montreal or a 4-unit building in Saint-Vital or another small location. And in addition, oftentimes, there needs to be a minimum of 24 units for it to be deemed a project. So if there are 300 people in a town and they need to build 24 units worth several $1 million, that's what they would have to build to get funding when it doesn't meet their needs nor their reality. So if we have the same requirements across the board, until we understand that there is a wide diversity in terms of geographic realities, then rural communities won't have access to funds for housing units when, in fact, they really need funding, but they're simply left out of the funding programs. Oftentimes, the administrative burden increases the cost of the project. Now, if the same thing is being asked in terms of administrative requirements that need to be provided, well, those plans are the same, whether it be a matter of building 4 units or 24. So the cost of all of the specifications and paperwork that's required means that these projects become extremely expensive because the administrative costs are not amended based on the size of the project. Oftentimes, when it comes to putting the project together, a lot of money is invested to obtain the expertise, specifications, etc., to have a project that meets these standards without even knowing whether or not the funding will be coming through. And so as a result, that increases the financial risk for the municipalities because, for example, if we're talking about $100,000 in with a budget for a municipality of about $800,000 for all services, well, that's a significant amount of money being set aside without even knowing whether or not the project will be completed. It's huge. So as a result, large municipalities have many projects that are underway. They're in the drawer, and when programs come out, all they have to do is open up the drawer and pull out the project, and, well, this is the one we're going to be going ahead with. We're ready with it. We also need to take a look at the organization in these very small municipalities. In large cities, there's architects, urban planners, all types of professionals working for the municipality. But in the small ones, there's a director general, the municipal secretary, who might even be working part-time, an inspector, and a general worker who does snow removal and all kinds of things like that, extra tasks. So putting together a project, a social housing project for a small municipality with a number of specifications is such that they have to get an architectural plan, engineering studies from outside sources. It's very costly. They don't have the resources inside because they simply don't have those resources. That results in a number of challenges, and I think that at some point we have to say that we will change these requirements, the administrative nature of these projects based on the size and resources available to the municipality, so that larger urban centers don't attract all of the funding for their projects. There needs to be a significant portion earmarked for projects in municipalities with fewer than 3,000 people to prevent all money from going elsewhere than to these very small municipalities. They need the housing units, but they simply can't see how they could possibly succeed in going ahead with the project. Then the government announces a lot of projects, some money, but nobody knows when it'll be spent. Now we're hearing that 80% of the budget will come after the next election. So if there's a small municipality that wants to put together a project, well, the municipality has to commit funds, significant funds, to put together a project without knowing whether the government will be reelected or not. So I may have done it for nothing. There won't be funds available when the time comes to proceed with my project. So that's unacceptable when it comes to management. I think that if funds are announced for housing, then it needs to be stated that the funds are available immediately and that there's, say, a 3-year period for the project. What we're doing is seeing a smokescreen that's been created for people. People don't even know whether, in the end, ultimately, the project will go ahead. They don't know what will happen with the election. They won't know what's going to happen 2 or 3 years down the road. Maybe, as with the democratic reform, announcement will be made, oh, it's too complicated, there's problems, we won't go ahead with it. So then they still don't have their housing units. So in the meantime, people are living in poverty. They can't overcome it. These are situations where we're mortgaging children's futures. They are remaining in violent situations too. Now, if we look at housing for Indigenous peoples, where nothing's been built in several communities for a long time, we see situations where a woman is exposed to domestic violence and she wants to throw her partner out. When she throws him out, this person is thrown out of the community because there isn't any other accommodation available anywhere. But oftentimes these women are too afraid. They're saying, well, I can't throw my husband out on the street because there are no other options, and so they give in and remain in these violent situations. Oftentimes it's similar. If a woman wants to leave, she doesn't leave from her house. She has to leave her entire community without knowing whether or not there's a space elsewhere. In Abitibi-Temiscamingue, there is a shortage of workers, a shortage of housing that has gone on for decades. Nothing is moving forward. People can't pay their rents. They live in unhealthy conditions. They face intimidation from their landlords. But people seem to think that it's okay to leave people living in that kind of situation, as if they weren't important. There are options to develop rural economies in regions like mine. There is a huge potential, but at present, we can't get that economy moving because we can't house people. We can't send in workers when there's work available, when companies are closing because there's not enough labor. So how can the government say we're going to be investing this money in the next mandate, another mandate, when the needs are urgent? Now, once the funds have been granted, well, housing doesn't grow like flowers. We have to find entrepreneurs, construction workers. It doesn't happen overnight. They're not built overnight. So now, these young children's future is being mortgaged for several years now. I mentioned larger cities, and I mentioned places where the last time housing units were built was back when I was about 5. Well, this is, in fact, mortgaging the childhood and teenage years of of children. There won't be any housing built before they become adults, and that is unacceptable. So paying 75% of one's income for housing, that mortgages as many other things. Those aren't people who are going to be able to be earning money. If 75% of your budget goes to housing, well, how are you going to pay for a car that would enable you to get a better job, earn more money? Because you need a car, because if you don't have one, you can't get to your job. There's no public transit because there isn't the critical mass in terms of population. So it's extremely important to understand that housing needs are urgent, they're immediate, and I hope that the government will understand the realities